Hi, welcome to this part of my guide and review of the FlexTale Solo Adventuring Toolkit. If you haven't seen the other parts of my guide and review, please check out the playlist in the description below. This time we are going to take a look at player character roles. I think this is very important for solo play in general, but also if you want to decide if you want to control or play as several different player characters or just one, or perhaps just a few. As always, I am going to be reading a few key paragraphs and I am going to give you my opinions on those paragraphs. So, each player character in an adventuring party serves one or more roles. The players may not even think of their player characters as fulfilling roles, or even be aware of the breakdown of what classes fill which role best. So yes, this depends a lot on the sort of role-playing experience that you are looking for. In a role-playing game, where tactical considerations are very important, or even strategic planning, you need to think about the party configuration. Some roles are better for specific tasks when compared to other roles that are somewhat decent, perhaps even passable, when it comes to very particular tests, very particular checks, how to handle different situations. But there could also be players that do not care too much about that. They are more focused on a party or group that follows a specific theme and throws anything related to tactics and strategies off the board, completely outside of the map of the scheme of the adventure. When it comes to the treatment of player character classes in this solo adventuring toolkit, they only consider 11 core classes, usually those that are handled in role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. Because there are many role-playing games, it's almost impossible to cover them all. So they focus on these 11 archetypes. This approach keeps things simple and digestible, without cluttering things up with too many options, specifically derivative options. There are of course nuances to the other classes that are omitted, that is, advantages, quirks, drawbacks, elements that would outright exclude or include an extended class in a category where this document claims it does not belong. Let's talk about player character roles in solo play. When it comes to solitary gameplay, by design, the game experience is less social, of course, seeing as how the group consists of a single person in charge of everything. So all triumphs and all failures or defeats fall under the responsibility of a single player. Now, in solo play, I sometimes experience an analysis paralysis when I am creating a party, when I am running things with perhaps 2, 3, or 4 player characters or more. I sometimes find myself driven towards or leading towards a particular party configuration that caters to my own playing style and my preferences. This is obvious, of course, but when it comes to my personal experience, I usually enjoy martial classes, that is, barbarians, paladins, fighters, but also necromancer type of characters. So my parties are usually always geared or just like tailored towards such archetypes. You may be experiencing something similar, so it could be a bit challenging. For example, I usually do not play as bards or thief or mountebank sort of characters, although I consider those archetypes, those classes, pretty cool. Especially a lot of you know that I really like the Dying Earth, and in the Dying Earth there are several of those types of characters. But when it comes to my particular style, at least in solo play, I usually don't go for those sorts of roles within the party. Now let's talk about player character role selection. Roles can come about in a number of different ways, and these approaches can even be mixed in the context of a single group. That is, some characters might choose their roles intentionally, and others may come across them by accident or necessity. That is, getting into the game, a character may end up acting as the protector or the front line of that party, perhaps by necessity, or even by design. Sometimes things fall into place during the course of play. When you started out as a ranger, you probably thought of yourself as a skirmisher or a hit and run sort of character, but under certain circumstances perhaps the wizard is a danger, perhaps the rogue is a bit too careless, and sometimes the barbarian or the paladin or the fighter of the group end up with too much on their plate. They have a very difficult time keeping the other members of the party safe, and now you also become a frontliner or the tank of the group. Or maybe something different happens. Maybe you are playing as an Eldritch Knight sort of character, or the fighter wizard, and you are going to participate in battle with a nice balance of melee and spellcasting, but suddenly the casters of the group, they start to get knocked down or paralyzed or incapacitated or even killed, and so now you become the full-time caster for a particular combat or maybe for many other combats to come. So all of this has to do with filling roles perhaps by accident or as intended, as planned, or because you need to fill in some gaps during the course of play. So it all depends on context. It is based on encounters, on the areas that are lacking in a party, some places within the group that need to be strengthened. So in the Solo Adventuring Toolkit, they recommend that you divide the areas of expertise of the different character classes in majors and minors. That is, for example, a ninja is going to be a major when it comes to infiltration, perhaps assassination, it depends on the role-playing game system. But sometimes the ninja plays a very minor role when it comes to close quarters combat. It depends on the system, but it's usually so. Now, when it comes to the Cleric, it's usually a very balanced class with ability to heal, protect, but also to hold your own in a fight. You usually enjoy the benefits of good armor and decent weapons. But when it comes to offensive spellcasting capabilities, the Cleric is usually outclassed by the most powerful spellcasters in the group. Like I said, it depends on the system, but it's usually like that. Now, let me give you my general thoughts on all of this. I think one of the more fun aspects of role-playing games and party configuration is coming up with unusual party combinations. So maybe you don't want to include healers, full-time healers in your party as a solo player. Perhaps you want to include a paladin and a ranger, and because they usually have some limited form of healing when it comes to spells and abilities, you can kinda make up for that. But you could end up thinking, no, eventually I am going to be overwhelmed by the attacks of the enemies, so I need to cover my weakness in some other way. Maybe you decide to include two very powerful spellcasters that are able to weaken the enemy or hex the enemy or just outright destroy the opposition through their powerful spells. So that way, because of your limited healing capabilities, you need to take down the enemy as fast as possible so that foe inflicts minor damage or just regular damage when compared to what would otherwise be inflicted if the enemy got to you before you managed to weaken the opposition or reduce the number of enemies that are going to attack you. You could also end up thinking, but I need some skills to navigate the dangerous environments safely. So instead of including another spellcaster, you include perhaps a wizard thief sort of character, one of those like arcane tricksters, and that way you have that area a bit covered. And because you have a ranger in the party that is going to be healing and participating as a frontline combatant, the ranger, because it's a bit more of an agile class when compared to, for example, the fighter or the paladin, you could also make up for that weakness in that way. But it's all about that. Like I said, this is just a fun way to handle party configuration. And as you can see, it's more focused on your typical fantasy role-playing game experience. If you are playing a game with intrigue and political situations, or completely focused on espionage, social encounters, you're not going to be thinking about that particular party configuration. If it's a game that has to do with perhaps investigation or research of a particular site, you're going to be thinking of adding a scientist that specializes in alien substances in a science fiction setting. This scientist is kind of like a biochemist. Another one could be focused on analyzing things from a theoretical physics perspective. And because you're going to be heading into unknown worlds, perhaps, or planets, maybe you want to include a security outfit as well. So it's all about the sort of experience that you are playing. Like I said, I sometimes end up a bit overthinking things that, oh, I want to include this character class and this race and this species. And I usually try my best to step out of my usual choices. But like I said, I usually end up creating like, oh, I want to create this like a hoplite or a gladiator or a necromancer, a warlock. So it's all about your preferences and how much you want to step outside of your comfort zone. Another thing that somewhat frustrates me is that I also have to be realistic about the characters that I am going to be controlling. Because I could be thinking, well, I'm going to create 6 player characters, but at the time of gameplay, depending on the system, they are just too much to handle. It's not impossible for you to control 6 player characters, but like I said, depending on how crunchy the system is, the degree of simulation, bookkeeping could be a bit overwhelming, remembering the different spells and abilities and powers and skills for each of the player characters, and it's going to take more time. Like I said, it's not impossible, but you need to be realistic. You need to take on that adventure module that you're going to be soloing or randomly or dynamically generating on your own. You need to think about, well, I'm going to spend like 2, 3, or 4 times the usual gameplay time that I take when playing with other people or playing solo with a single player character. You need to keep that in mind, and definitely you will have to feel comfortable writing and erasing, or if you're using your computer or your tablet or your smartphone, making different adjustments and handling the logistics for all of the members of the party. That's why whenever I play a tabletop role-playing game as a solo experience, everything that allows me to play with just one player character or just a few player characters, I take advantage of that. Instead of controlling many different hirelings, I usually end up buying bags of holding to avoid keeping track of the stats and the actions of different characters at the same time. I usually do that. I rely on all of the mechanisms of different role-playing game systems to create the most powerful solo character possible, so that way I don't need to control 4 player characters, just 1, or perhaps at most 2 or 3. Or you could also play Quick and Classic, which I currently consider to be the best classic fantasy RPG when it comes to controlling a large party of adventurers, perhaps 6 or 8 adventurers at the same time, with very simple resolution and minimal bookkeeping because of the simple stats. Well, thank you for watching this part of the guide and review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.